All right, this week we are dedicating our reading to benefits. I will fully admit I am not a complete expert on benefits. They're a pretty complicated part of compensation. And in fact, most HR employees, even managers, aren't necessarily going to be experts on benefits. So a lot of what I'm going to tell you is pretty generic, pretty overview. I'll add to what the book has, since a lot of what the book is based on is economics, and there's some HR specific stuff that we need to know about benefits. But otherwise, we're just going to talk about how you determine what benefits you're going to offer as an organization, and then what required and discretionary benefits are generally available for you to put into your benefits packages for employees. So, what are benefits? They're the non-wage portion of compensation. So, when we say compensation, we actually mean both salary or wages and benefits. In HR speak, we usually call this indirect pay. So, the pay plus the indirect pay is what we call total rewards. This is the part that's not in the book, but you need to know this vocabulary if you're going to work in HR or have to do anything with benefits with HR. So, we just call these total rewards. Excuse me. The book talks about three broad types. We don't usually think about in HR these broad types, but I did like the way they organize the kinds of benefits there are because it matches really well with what are required and what are discretionary. And then for the discretionary, which ones have federal or state laws mandated around them and which ones don't really have any rules that regulate them. So the first one is protection. These are different kinds of insurance, essentially, usually related to health insurance, but also retirement that we offer employees. The second kind is paid time off, so things like vacations, holidays, sick leave, etc. And then the third kind is services. Most of these are pretty discretionary. These are things like offering wellness benefits, for example. For most employees, benefits are about 30% of the total compensation. So when we're figuring out people's compensation, we actually have to include not only their salary and wages, but those benefits. And for most employees, like I could do this right now if I wanted to, go into our HRIS as an employee, and I can see my total benefits package. I will get a total summary, and it will include both my salary and how much my benefits are that I have elected to have from the university. If you are a federal employee and sometimes state employees, the percent of your compensation that will be benefits can actually be higher because there are more benefits that are offered often, especially to federal employees. That's one of the benefits of being a federal employee. And as we'll talk about later, one reason that federal and state governments can provide more benefits is that they have such a large number of employees that they can get a lot of really good group discounts and offer those group discounts to their employees. Benefits are very strategic, as we'll talk about later in this chapter, but they're also extremely costly, not only because they take up so much of that compensation, but because a lot of the costs are getting higher and higher for some of the benefits that we'll talk about. So what are required benefits? For those of you who are in my 531 class, we'll talk about this later in the semester. If any of you have taken 531 before, hopefully you've seen this before. The required benefits include Social Security. Our textbook also calls it OASDI because that's the official name of it. Unemployment benefits, workers' compensation, and then some states require disability. Kansas is not one of those, but I'll include it here because some of you may not be in Kansas. Discretionary benefits are employer's choice. So things like health insurance and most kinds of insurance that are related to health, like vision, dental, prescriptions, retirement benefits, paid leave, and then any services that they provide. So what are some examples of these benefits? And these are in the categories that the textbook creates. These aren't usually the categories necessarily that HR professionals think about benefits. The first is protection. So medical insurance is the most common benefit that employers provide. Many employers also provide life insurance plans that either they pay for and or they also have employee plans. Disability insurance, which usually can be short or long-term disability insurance, and then pensions or 401k plans or something similar to that. For paid time off, most places have vacation, Holidays are at the discretion of the employer. So federal workers usually get the most holidays. I think it's something like 13 days a year. State employees often get many holidays as well, not always 13. But whether an employer chooses to recognize a holiday and pay their employees for that holiday is up to them. Sick leave, bereavement. So if someone close to you dies, giving you time to make arrangements, go to the funeral, etc. And then jury duty. The kinds of services that the book talks about, and a lot of these services many employers do actually provide, even though they're discretionary. Employee assistance programs are what are called EAPs. Childcare, which can either be supplementing the cost of childcare or actually having childcare on premises. Educational reimbursement, either educational reimbursement for classes or degrees that you're doing while you're with that employer, or to pay back loans from before you join the employer. Wellness programs, parking. My old job, I worked at the University of Wisconsin. They pay for bus passes for all of their employees because parking is so expensive and really hard to get on campus. And then other kinds of discounts for certain kinds of stores or services. For example, if you're on campus, there's some kinds of services that might be available to faculty and staff at a reduced price that would be cheaper than going out off campus and getting those same services. So why do organizations offer benefits if they cost so much money? Obviously, one, especially with required benefits, is that there are laws that require them. There may also be price controls and tax code issues. So, price controls can tell you that employers that you have to offer a minimum or maximum amount of certain kinds of benefits. A really good example might be disability insurance, for example. If you're going to provide it, you might have states might mandate a certain amount that you have to provide. For health insurance, the Affordable Care Act also says something about what you have to provide if you're going to provide that kind of benefit. And then the tax code, a lot of the benefits that we're going to talk about are what we call pre-tax benefits, meaning they come out of employees' paychecks before they get taxed. So it actually reduces their income. It also means that they can take benefits from not having to pay taxes on that money. For example, for health insurance and healthcare costs, they can pay for that with pre-tax money and never pay taxes on that money because it was taken out ahead of time. Unions actually have a lot to do with a lot of the benefits we provide. Unions fought for a lot of the benefits, like a shorter work week, for example, healthcare and retirement. And they wanted security for their employees and for people after they've retired or left the employer. And then they also wanted some status because a lot of these benefits used to only be available to executives, and they thought that employees could also benefit from these from benefits. There's also, as our book talks about, some managerial attitudes. There used to be this idea, I would say in the early 20th century, when some of these benefits were first starting, of what we called paternalism. So kind of seeing the employer as like a parent figure or father figure almost, and then taking care of their children, their employees. We don't really think of that anymore. I don't think most managers think of their employees that way anymore. Now it's more of a partnership that for your employees to give you their time, effort, and energy, you need to help take care of them and provide them the security they need inside and outside of work. And so that's why a lot of managers think that benefits can be really helpful. It also can provide wellness benefits, for example, for employees so that they can stay well. And it can actually reduce the price of health insurance later when they don't have to go to the doctor because they've been able to participate in wellness programs. The way we're going to talk about it mostly in this class is as a competition for talent. We want to be able to provide benefits that employees want, that will attract the best employees and retain them in our company, but also that helps us be able to compete within our industry against competitors. There's also, as I mentioned, some efficiency for some of these plans like health insurance, life insurance, etc., where you can get reduced prices for your employees with a group insurance discount because you have more employees than it would be cheaper for them to go as a group than it would be for each individual to go try to find their own insurance. And then for employee interests, a lot of employees when the economy changes and they're also taking on risks. For example, the way we do retirement is much riskier now than it was before. We want to provide a set of benefits that provides them some security, especially because they're going to be taking more risks to take on some of those benefits than maybe they did in the past. So there's a lot of government influence. I'm just going to give some examples here of laws and agencies. The Employee Retirement Income Security Act. I'm going to be honest, some of these I don't know the full names of because we just call it ERISA, for example, in HR. That actually is a law that covers retirement plans. So it tells employers what they have to provide in those retirement plans. It also tells them how they have to insure those plans. And that was created in 1974. That creation was really based on pensions, which we'll talk about as well. Those are defined benefit plans. A lot of employees had pensions. And then what was happening is the pensions guaranteed a certain amount of money when you retired. But some of these companies were going bankrupt or they weren't investing the money very well in these pension plans. And so by the time employees were retiring, they either didn't have as much money as they were promised they would get, or there was no money at all. And so ERISA was created to prevent that problem. And since then, as we'll talk about later, a lot of employers went to defined contribution plans, and that way they don't have to guarantee a certain amount when you retire. And they're also not necessarily completely responsible for investing that money and investing it well to make sure that it's still there by the time their employees retire. OSHA, or the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, is actually a government entity that does a lot of safety checks. They make sure that people aren't getting ill on the job or aren't getting injured on the job. And so there's a lot of laws. They also have a lot of administrative authority to oversee safety in the workplace. COBRA, or Consolidated Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1986, allows employees when they leave a job to take their health insurance with them for a certain amount of time afterwards. It can be very expensive because employees have to then pay the cost of the insurance, which includes their cost and the employer's cost, plus up to 2 or 3% of an administrative cost to administer the plan. But at least that's available. And you have to remember that this was available before we had the Affordable Care Act, where there was a marketplace for insurance. And so for a lot of people, this was the only way to keep their insurance if they lost their job or if they were moving between jobs and they had a gap in their insurance coverage. And then HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996, outlines guidelines for employers when they provide health insurance. For example, they cannot be involved in knowing the health data of their employees, and they usually have a third-party entity that does that. There's also lots of other privacy laws around HIPAA and around your health information, but that helped provide some guidelines for employers about what to do when they're providing these kinds of insurance. There have also been wage or price controls that historically boosted benefits. Benefits were originally offered, at least one story I've seen, were originally offered during the Great Depression because the government had capped how much you could pay employees. And so to get around that cap, they provided benefits instead to employees. And so that was part of the wage and price controls to begin sort of this idea that we provide benefits when we hire employees. And then for tax policy, as I said, many of these benefits are pre-tax, so it gives employees some kind of tax advantage that they wouldn't have otherwise.